So creep factor 11. That's where we're at for tonight. Not because it's spooky, not because it's scary, because you're going to see me smiling way more than you ever would. And the creep factor on that is so high that Jeremy and Jay have decided they're staying away from this one tonight. So you've got me for tonight and our very special guest, as you would know by clicking on the thumbnail, that is an awesome fellow by the name of Graham Phillips. Now, if you don't know who Graham Phillips is, he is a British author and historical detective. How cool does that sound? Business card, historical detective, sensational. Now, what is a historical detective, you might ask? Well, think Lara Croft, but not in the clothes that she wears or the guns. Think Indiana Jones. Yeah, think more Indiana Jones. It's a lot more on topic for tonight. But yeah, he investigates historical enigmas. So you think about things like King Arthur, Robin Hood, the death of Alexander the Great, all shrouded in mystery. Are they real? Are they not? Some are, some aren't, but the facts are all hidden. Graham, he actually hunts down the actual facts and then publishes them in books. Now, not just that. I mean, you talk about King Arthur, you've got questions about, obviously, Excalibur, about Merlin, but also about the Holy Grail. Now, Graham has also researched the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant, amongst many others. I mean, he has a number of books published, and they are all totally intriguing. And as you will all tell by the end of this hour, how interesting this guy is. And I'm sure you will all go out and buy some of his books because they are absolutely sensational reading. Now, what more can I say? I'm sorry, I am super excited about this interview. So he's got a new book that has just been released, which we're going to talk about in just a couple of minutes. But we do have a little video to play, and then we are going to jump straight into it. Boom!
A Victorian family with ancient knowledge. A child with remarkable powers. A 19th century occult society called the Order of Meoniah. A lost relic called the Heart of the Rose. And a race against time. Strange Fate is the true account of the investigation by Jodie Russell and myself that became an incredible adventure, a real-life paranormal detective story and encounters with forces beyond bizarre. It is the search for the Heart of the Rose, an ancient stone said to have the power to influence destiny itself. In central England is the 19th century mansion of Biddulph Grange, once the home of the Meoniah group. In its gardens they created mysterious temples, standing stones and a sacred spring somehow imprinted with events of the past. They once possessed the relic we sought and left clues to its location in paintings that still survive. Seemingly ordinary people who then vanish without a trace, guide us to secrets hidden for years. Incredibly, history, even reality, inexplicably appears to change. This is an adventure involving time, fate, and the multiverse, leading us to haunted manors, secret chambers, and enigmatic finds. An ancient tomb where worlds collide. A holy well where secrets are revealed. And a haunted mirror that inspired the story of Alice. Under the threat of being lost forever in a world of the impossible, our research leads us ever deeper into the unknown. We must find the heart of the rose before time finally runs out. all in our new book, Strange Fate, out now and available on Amazon.
And we're back, guys. As you can see, I'm still like a giddy little schoolgirl because I've got the awesome Graham Phillips right there on screen. How are you, Graham?
I am very well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. It's the interview that I've been wanting to do for a long time, as you know. And finally, the podcast gods have shined down on us.
It's taken long enough, but we got there in the end.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that you're going to come on many more times with all your new books and everything. So
absolutely, we'd love to.
Fantastic. So I was telling everybody about what you started out as, and you started out working for a paranormal magazine of sorts, didn't you?
That's right. It began over 40 years ago now, 1979. I was a journalist to start off with, and I got a job as the editor of a magazine that investigated the paranormal. There was a few about at that time. I suppose the nearest equivalent to in Australia that it would be like is New Dawn magazine.
Yep.
That's a paranormal magazine. It was that kind of thing. And I was the editor. I'd always had an interest in the paranormal and the unexplained, but I wasn't any person that was involved particularly in research or anything like that. But this really got me hooked because at first I was thinking, wow, there's loads of people out there. They're just either delusioned, they're making this up so they get some attention, or they're doing it for the money. And so that kind of was my thought. So when we would go along or people would come back that were working for the magazine with reports and interviews with people who had seen or claimed to have heard weird things, I was saying, yeah, what's the motive? But I thought, well, it goes in the magazine anyway. But we had to have some sort of standard. So I would need more than one witness usually. And that's the way I went about it. And then, I was the skeptical one who was saying that somebody who claimed to have heard footsteps somewhere off in the house in the middle of the night when they were alone, it's a bit much, come on. But what was to happen to me and the people I knew at that magazine offices within a few months of the magazine launching was to literally blow anyone's mind. It started with an investigation we were conducting, just a completely normal routine investigation. But we didn't just do paranormal stuff, we did sort of historical mysteries as well, legends, that sort of thing. And one of the legends that we're investigating was that the British Queen Mary Queen of Scots in the 1500s, Shakespeare's time, Mary Queen of Scots was said to have possessed a ring with a green stone on it that held some sort of miraculous paranormal powers. It could cause strange things to happen. She was executed in the 1580s. This ring vanished, and the guy that was, nobody knew what happened to it. The guy that had her executed on behalf of Queen Elizabeth really wanted this stone for himself, a guy called Walsingham. And he searched the quarters that she'd been housed in. He interrogated people she'd known and couldn't find anything about this stone. And it had vanished. The story grew up, or the legend, that one of her supporters, she was a Catholic monarch in Scotland. She fled to England when there'd been an uprising there. Elizabeth had been Protestant, and eventually it led to her being executed for being a Catholic. She had Catholic followers in England. One of these characters was a man called Humphrey Packington, who lived in a stately manor at a place called Harvington not far from Birmingham in the centre of England. And the legend grew up that he, because he'd visited her when she was in prison before her death, she had given him the job of making sure this stone was hidden somewhere, and that a series of clues were left behind to lead further generations to discover where it was. And he had lived at this place, Harvington Hall, which is now open to the public. I went there with a guy called Andy Collins, who was he was working for the magazine at the time, and he was one of the main reporters, if you like. We went to this place, and they said, "Oh yes, the legend is that Humphrey Packington hid this stone somewhere in this area, and that he left a series of clues as to where it was that were hidden somewhere in the house." And I said, "That's brilliant. It's a great story. We can use this for the magazine.
Yeah.
You know, we'll look for the clues." They said, "Well, I think they've already been found just recently." And not long before we went there, there'd been renovations to the building, and then in the upstairs corridor, plaster had been removed from the wall to reveal all these paintings that had been basically bricked up for centuries, and they'd been there since the early 1600s,
Wow.
Humphrey Packington's time, and they were faded, but you could still tell what they showed. They showed characters known as the Nine Worthies. That's 9 heroic characters from biblical, mythological, or historical tales. The central figure was a figure of King Arthur wielding the magic sword Excalibur. And they said, these must be the clues that had been spoken about in the legend. And so if this greenstone was hidden anywhere, then these particular murals on the wall might be the clues to where they were. Up until then, the whole investigation had been completely and absolutely straightforward, just historical. An interesting story. If we could solve these clues, great. But nothing mystical had happened until suddenly, after myself and Andrew Collins, who incidentally is also an author of historical mysteries, and some people might know him, Andrew Collins, so this is both of us. We were the only 2 people that knew that we were investigating this case of the Greenstone. And when we returned to the offices of the magazine, which were in an old Victorian house in Wolverhampton, which is another central England city. When we returned to the office, somebody said, you've just had a phone call from a man called Alan Beard. Now, we knew that Alan Beard, he was a friend of somebody who was one of the journalists who worked for the magazine. Had a call from Alan Beard, who said he thinks you ought to know he fell asleep in his armchair, or while he was at work, or I can't remember where he was, but he'd fallen asleep and had this vivid dream about a green stone that we should be looking for, and that he should tell us.
Wow.
We thought, how did he know we were looking for a green? Even the person who took the message didn't know this. And I began to think, well, unless it's a really weird coincidence, he might be winding us up, and he's been following us around, or is he trying to get one over on us, and to see if he's a wind up? So I didn't, I spoke to him, and he said he just saw this green stone. He said that was set in an old silver ring, which is what the story of Mary Queen of Scots was all about, and that he thought we ought to search for it. He said, but he had another part of his dream. He saw this sword, and a voice told him, I suppose it's just like a voice in his mind in this dream, that first we must find this sword, which would in turn lead us to the stone. He said, so remember the sword. That's what I have to tell you. I said, what time did you get this dream? He said, he worked as a lineman, fixing, lines on telephones that go across the countryside. So he said he'd fallen asleep at work at 3 o'clock. Was he hanging up some telegraph post somewhere? I was meant to ask him this. Anyway,
that might not have
fallen
ended
asleep
well.
at work. I assume he was having a break or something. And that was at like 3 o'clock or 3:10 or whatever. That was exactly the time we'd first seen this mural depicting this King Arthur with his sword Excalibur. The sword, the central image to this mural. And he'd mentioned this sword, and I thought, he can't have known this. There's something going on here, if it's telepathy at the very least.
Mm.
And basically, it must have been before we went back there the next time, and that must have been within the next 24 hours. There was a lady that we'd investigated called Marion Sunderland, because we'd interviewed her at one point not too long before, because her daughter had seen a UFO, and she basically had seen it flying off too or something. I don't know. Anyway, so we knew of this lady. She suddenly phones up the magazine and said that she'd fallen asleep while watching TV. Everyone's fallen asleep all over the place. She'd fallen asleep while watching TV and had a dream that we were looking. She didn't mention a green stone. She said, "Are you looking for a sword?" We thought, well, we are now. And she said, "The sword, you have to find this to lead you to something else. And when you find it, there will be a strange smell of rotting vegetation." And she said that there's water nearby. And Alan Beard had said that when we find the sword, there'd be a holly bush right next to it. So it was all fun. There's no way Alan Beard knew Marion Sunderland. In those days, there was no such thing as the internet, Facebook, mobile phones, anything like this. I mean, she lived like 100 miles from Alan Beard. I mean, there's no way they would have known each other unless it was a deliberately very well-conceived hoax. And how would they know what we were doing anyway?
Mm.
So, with me and Andy thought, right, we're going to go back to Harvington Hall. There's clearly something about this mural, even if it's just fate or synchronicities or telepathy or whatever, helping us along here with these people's visions. This mural may very well lead to where the green stone was hidden. So eventually, which is cutting a very long story short, this image of King Arthur in this mural, behind him there's a hill depicted with his knights gathered on it. And within a couple of miles of Harvington Hall, where this was, there was a hill marked on the map called Knights Hill, Knights of the Round Table on this hill. We thought that could be referring to that place.
Mm.
When we discovered that right at the bottom of this Knights Hill, there were two lakes joined by a little stream over which was an old stone bridge, known locally as Arthur's Bridge. We thought, this has got to be it. This is what these murals are leading to. Anybody who knew they were trying to search for something, and realized that these murals depicted clues to lead to, would clearly eventually work out that Arthur's Bridge at the bottom of Knights Hill would have something to do with it. So we went to Knights. Well, I mean, Andy and I were so thrilled and excited by all this. We just went off there. I mean, it was winter time, so we were there at sort of in the dark, freezing cold, not the right kind of clothing for that sort of be outdoors at night at all. And we thought, let's hear what. So by torchlight, we went up to where the bridge was, and we stood on the bridge, and we were thinking, we'd very quickly managed to go into a local library before it had closed and found that the bridge did date from the 1500s. So it was there in Humphrey Packington's time. So we were thinking, this could be where something's hidden, but if so, where? We can't pull a bridge apart. But the figure of Arthur in the painting mural, he's actually holding his sword like this, and he's looking down, and to his left and the hill with the knights on is behind him, and the sword is pointing in that direction too. If you were to stand on the bridge with the Knight's Hill behind you and look down and to your left, you'll be looking into the foundations of the bridge on the side overlooking the larger of the two lakes. Andy just suggested, well, I reckon it's behind one of the stones on that side. But which one? Well, the only number that had been alluded to was the number 9, as in the 9 worthies, which was the name of the painting.
Yep.
9 across, 9 down. If we did 9 across, 9 up, you'd be at the top of the bridge, and that would basically be too high up.
Yeah.
But if you went 9 across and 9 down, that would put it in a fairly safe place if you could get it behind the stone. So we went down there, not really expecting to find anything, until Andy said to me, "Can you smell that weird, horrible smell of, vegetation or whatever?" He said, "Marion said when you find the sword, you'll get that smell." I thought, "Oh, yeah." And she said it was by water. We were understanding water to get to where this was. And the other thing was, right above it, where we had come to on the wall, 9 across, 9 down, was this holly bush. Alan Beard had said a holly bush stood there. So we were really excited. Eventually, we managed to remove the stone 9 across, 9 down by, cutting around it. And eventually, we got this big stone out. And it clearly hadn't been touched for years. It was overgrown with vegetation and brambles, and there was moss on it. And we had to really fiddle around to get this thing out. When we did, we were absolutely gobsmacked, because behind this stone, there was this little ledge. And on the ledge was clearly what was either a long dagger or a short sword. And we thought, oh my God, we have, and we took it out. It turned out to be something called a dirk, which is
a Scottish thing,
a ceremonial Scottish short sword. And it was covered in years of silt and sediment. And we had to have it eventually taken to a museum to be cleaned up. But seeing this, and we're there in the middle of the night in the dark, and we're thinking, this is just impossible. I mean, this may have been one of the first times that buried treasure, if you like, had been found by following a series of clues that had been left hundreds of years ago, deliberately to cipher. But as far as I know, it's the first time that buried treasure had ever been found by that and a combination of that and people's psychic impressions. It virtually proved the existence of some sort of paranormal phenomena, even if it was just telepathy. But if it was just telepathy, how did they know we were looking for a sword? How could Marion have known where it was with this smell of vegetation? They couldn't have put it there. It had been there for years.
It's funny how you said...
So this was quite astonishing.
Yeah, it's funny
when the sword was eventually cleaned up, to prove it, it had the insignia of Mary Queen of Scots on it. Remember, she's the person who's supposed to have the sword.
Yeah.
Plus the words written along its blade, Meoniah for Mary. Meoniah is what we had learned was the name of a secret society started in the 1500s by the Elizabethan occultist, Dr. John Dee. And they'd been into all sorts of things to do with magic stones and weirdness and all this. And so by searching for something that seemingly had once been, Mary Queen of Scots seemed to have been somehow involved in this group that included John Dee. So that was the beginning of a whole series of weird and wonderful things that began happening to me and others that I knew at the time working at the magazine. And remember, before this, I'd have been skeptical if somebody said they heard footsteps at night. So I know I've been rattling on a bit, but that's how it began.
No, it's just funny how you were mentioning that, because you're talking about King Arthur and the lady's name Marion. There's so many coincidences, if you can use that word, coincidence, that it was like somebody was guiding you in that direction. And in all honesty, from what you were saying there, it led you on a path which took you way beyond that, because a lot of your books sort of extend out from that very story.
Yeah, I mean, what happened after this? Again, I won't go into the whole story of how we actually found the stone itself. We wrote a book, myself and another person who was working for the magazine at the time, Martin, called The Green Stone. That's been republished just a couple of years ago. So if anybody wants to get hold of the book, The Green Stone by Graham Phillips and Martin Keeman, to find how we followed the clues to eventually find this stone, then please get that. But when we actually discovered this stone, it turned out to be just a small stone about so big, kind of 3/4 inch long, 1/2 inch wide, just like something that had been in a ring. It was identified as just simple jade, so there's nothing weird about it. But it wasn't in a ring anymore. It was just a stone in the box that was found. But this is when things. I thought, well, obviously it doesn't have any real power, but it's interesting to have this thing. When we took it back to the offices of the magazine, strange things started to happen. And at first, I didn't, or nobody else, I don't think, associated these weird things that happened in the magazine offices as having anything to do with the stone. I think they probably thought it was to do with the fact, well, we're investigating the paranormal. We have a lot of mediums here. People have done seances and stuff. Maybe that's causing it. Or didn't really give it that much thought about that stone. So the first thing that started happening, I mean, we had about we'd be maybe 20 people in the building working on various things at one point. And suddenly it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, just getting dark. And I kind of looked around and thought, hold on, there's a lot of smoke in here. And people used to smoke at work in those days, but more than you would expect from people just smoking. And also, it was this strange incense-smelling smoke. So I went round, opened the door into a room that had been closed and nobody in there. That was filling with smoke. So I thought, we've got a fire somewhere, some electrical fire. So everyone was rushing around the building, checking all the cupboards, and no one could figure out where the smoke was coming from until it was getting so thick we were virtually done. And we were just about to phone the fire department when it suddenly started to dissipate. And after about 3 or 4 minutes, it had gone as if nothing had happened. And we thought, oh, that is weird. I don't think anybody put it down as anything paranormal to start off with, just weird. Then the next day, it happened again, the same thing. And the third day, the more this happened, it was like the children of Fatima. Every time they claimed to see the Virgin Mary, more people would turn up on the next day.
Yep.
More people who were interested in weird and the wonderful would turn up the next, day to witness at exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever time sun went down. And sure as anything it did, and people would check the place out. We had the electric department in, they checked the place, they couldn't find out what was wrong. The fire department, nobody could figure out what was going on. And it got national news on the national BBC News. They sent reporters out, they filmed it. They even brought in experts and no one could explain what was going on. But this was just the beginning, because then strange things started happening to the electricity in the place. Items would fuse out, lights would blow far more frequently than you'd expect. Yeah. Sometimes the front doorbell thing would suddenly start ringing. Go there'd be nobody there. And it wasn't stuck or anything. And so there was these electrical things. The people then started getting electric shocks from various appliances. Back came the electricity company. They couldn't explain it. What they did say that was weird was that there was an inordinately high amount of electricity running off the place. But we thought, what we got plugged in? They said, well, look at this. It looks like you're lighting the entire street. So they couldn't explain this. And eventually the situation occurred where the electricity bill that, the money we had to pay at the end of the quarter was so high that we said, we're not paying this. The property was leased, so we got in touch with the landlord and said, there's something wrong with the wiring here. I mean, this smoke had stopped after about a week. It didn't happen anymore. There's something wrong. You've got to fix it. Else someone else, But they couldn't find anything wrong. We weren't prepared to pay this enormously high electricity bill, so we were switched off. So we had to move to other headquarters, and other offices. But this place, we'd still got like so much time to run on the lease. And we could obviously just move out and probably try and sue the landlord. But I thought, this is actually quite weird. We've got weird things happening here. Maybe it won't happen anymore. There's no electricity. But we investigate the paranormal. We've got a poltergeist or something right on our doorstep. Actually in our doorstep, so to speak. So we thought, okay, let's see if anything happens when there's nobody there. No electric, no light, no nothing. And it did. People witnessed strange noises, whispering voices, singing. I once was walking through one of the main offices, and somebody said, "Graham, can you just help me with this?" Just in an ordinary voice, no kind of weirdness about it. I turned around, there was nobody there. I only realised then I was in the office on my own. This voice wasn't, oh. Although there were kind of whispering, peculiar voices and like distant singing, a lot of the voices that were just like somebody was having a conversation. Andy Collins, I think it was him, or was it one of them anyway, on one occasion was some people would sleep over at night, to see if anything happened. And he was sleeping there on one occasion, and he said he heard the door sort of opening, and somebody said, "Andy, are you there?" "Oh, there you are. Can you tell me?" Then the voice kind of just literally just sort of disappeared into the distance. And he said, it was just like I was listening to somebody who was really there, but in another world or something, coming across. They could see me for a second. So these kind of phenomena that was taking place there wasn't so much your traditional ghost or haunting. It was almost as if kind of other realities, maybe the past, the present, the future, another universe or something, were overlapping themselves on our world.
I've experienced that.
None of this stuff was normal haunting. Even when your kind of ordinary haunting things happen and things went flying across the room. There was one occasion when a box of magazines literally went flying past my head and hit the door, and then I can't figure out who could have done it. But unlike your normal circumstances where it's somebody said, "Oh, sorry, what?" A lot of this stuff I didn't even put in the book because it just sounded at the time. Nobody knew things or talked about things like multiverses going back, 40 odd years. When we wrote the book about the Green Stone, I had to try and calm down, tone down a lot of it to make it just sound all more like a normal ghost story, because some of the things that are happening were just made no sense to us at the time. So a ghost apologizes. "Oh, sorry, Graham, for throwing a box of magazines at." Thinking, this what? This weird blue gelatinous substance started oozing from the walls. And these were the kind of things that were happening. And again, I won't go too much on about the Greenstone story, because that's an old story. But these things began happening. Ultimately, the power of the Greenstone, if you like, or whatever was associated with it, seemed to dissipate, and everything finished. The place was sold. It was turned into apartments. Myself and Andy and a friend called Debbie went back to see the magazine offices for the first time in decades, about a year or so ago, and they're now turned into apartments. And what was like the main office part is now a flat. And the lady who lived there had read the Greenstone. She was fascinated by it. But she said, "No, nothing strange has ever happened here. There's no ghosts here." And so I didn't leave any, residual effect. But that so, if you like, intrigued me as to what was going on, that every so often, although after I finished working for the magazine, I began work as a writer or as an author, and I've probably written about 20 books over the years since then, mainly about historical mysteries, nothing to do with ghosts or the supernatural, because the kind of stuff I was investigating to do with the supernatural was so weird, bizarre, and no one was prepared to even comprehend what multiverses might be, that I could never write really about it. So I didn't, and I just concentrated on historical mysteries until recently. everybody is familiar with multiverses now.
Yeah.
They make, it's just all the major best-selling films like Doctor Strange and all that. It's all about multiverses. People understand all these weird kind of quantum ideas of mysterious synchronicities and strange things happen. Back then, there was just nobody apart from maybe one author in the world that I can think of who would have even written about it. And his name was John Keel, of which some of you may be familiar with. But the only author who even touched that kind of stuff. He's the one who wrote the original story of Mothman, which just seemed like a ludicrous story. You go and see the Mothman film, the kind of weird stuff that's happening in there, it's not your typical hauntings. No. Well, he was writing about that stuff in the 70s. And that was the only part. So what now, I thought, some of the investigation that's been happening recently, because I didn't stop this stuff, I just carried on investigating historical mysteries. But in the background was doing all this, I wouldn't even call it psychical research. People have called it questing, for want of a better word. When you go, you start to search for something, whether it's an ancient item that might have been hidden or the answer to a historical question, because it often involves history in some way. Then what happens when you're doing it is these strange synchronicities take place. People have strange visions, dreams, and you're kind of helped along by fate or, by psychic things. So somebody coined the term psychic questing for this rather than paranormal investigation.
Yes, I have heard
so I
that.
kind of carried on doing this on and off for years, but never written about it. As I said, now I thought, I think people are ready to hear. And so that is where I have now a new book out with my friend Jodie Russell, who has been working on this stuff with me. And that's called Strange Fate. And that's where I am today.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about it? Not giving it all the secrets of it away, but enough to entice people.
Right. I haven't now, as you can probably tell from the way I sort of speak, I've spoken about the Green Stone so much over the years that I can tell the story and probably be asleep like Alan Beard was halfway up a telegraph pole. So this is the first interview I've done about this. The book only came out a week or so ago. And this is the first interview. I haven't promoted it yet or anything. I'll put a few things on my Facebook.
Well, we are very privileged.
This is the very first interview. So it'll probably be inside out, back to front, and I'll be talking about it in such a way that people probably can get confused. But the best I can do is just tell a few anecdotes, I suppose. Remember I mentioned the Order of Nehemiah?
I do, yes.
This was this group that was founded by John Dee and had seemingly possessed the Green Stone. They didn't finish and end with Mary Queen of Scots' death or that particular period in history. There was an Order of Nehemiah that still existed in the late 19th century. Now, whether they call themselves, it was an occult group. They were founded in the 1850s at, there was a big Victorian mansion called Biddulph Grange in the northern hills of the Midlands of England. And at Biddulph Grange, there was a couple of families lived there, the Batemans and then the Heaths. And they were both involved, plus a lot of their friends and followers, in all sorts of interests concerning the paranormal. Psychic investigations, spiritualism, doing occult rituals to see if anything would happen. I mean, it was the age of the occult revival when everybody was into all that. It was the time when, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was written. Well, that was written sort of before, but Dracula by Bram Stoker, Jekyll and Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This was that period, sort of later Victorian era, and everyone was interested. It's when people started doing seances and table tapping, glass pushing, and all this suddenly became really popular. So they were into all this stuff, and they started a group to do this stuff. They were all really rich people, so they didn't have to do anything other than what they wanted. So they investigated ghost stories, They did seances. They dressed up in robes and gallivanted about chanting Egyptian rituals to see that they could make things happen. And they decided to call themselves the Order of Mianaya. Now, whether that was because they had any direct connection with the earlier group, or just knew of that earth, and therefore decided to name themselves after, we don't really know. One thing is certain, that Mianaya, Meonia, was the name of an ancient land in what's now Turkey that existed before the period of the Greek times, the ancient Greeks. But the ancient Greeks wrote about it as being a place where Hercules spent time. So many people have thought it was an invented land, but it seems to have been where Lydia was later on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. And what happened was that there was in legend, it had a queen called Omphale who made magic stones. And these stones each had different properties. The green stone was supposed to have been one of these. Hence, they may have called themselves the Order of Mianaya originally, because with reference to this magic stone that they had, and knew it was made by and where she came from. The Order of Mianaya in Victorian times obviously didn't have this green stone, but they did claim to possess another magic stone, if you want to call it that seems to have been fashioned by Omphale, and that was called the Heart of the Rose. So I not only thought it would be well worth investigating this Order of Mianaya, let's just call it the Mianaya group, same words, the Mianaya group, it's worth investigating the Mianaya group, and also perhaps looking to see what had happened to this magic stone they'd possessed. Because over my time investigating historical mysteries, I've searched for and found something which may have been the original Holy Grail. I've searched for and found a possible hiding place of the Ark of the Covenant. I've searched for and located the staff of Moses. I'm kind of like a real-life Indiana Jones. And believe it or not, George Lucas's company themselves described me as such. When the fourth Indiana Jones film came out, the one where he goes searching for the crystal skulls, they were bringing out, those were the days when people still had DVDs. They'd have a DVD box with all the films in it, plus a bonus disc. And on that disc, there would be films to do with behind the set and all this kind of stuff, the shooting of the movies. What they also wanted to do was to do an hour kind of documentary of 15 minutes of some person who really had searched for the Lost Ark, 15 minutes of somebody who really had searched for the Grail, 15 minutes of somebody who sought magic stones in India, and somebody who had sought for a crystal skull. Well, they basically had a choice of magic stones, Grail, or Ark of Covenant with me, but they chose the Grail. And so I was down. If anyone could ever track down a box set of Indiana Jones movies, you'll see on the bonus disc that I am down as a real life Indiana Jones. I like that. You know, I'm quite proud of that.
Well, it's more than that as well.
Anyway,
in this day and age, you'd be down as like a Robert Langdon as well, because you're doing a lot of what they talk about in the Da Vinci Code as well, which is like a modern day sort of spin on it as well.
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that one. Oh yeah, cool.
following the clues, especially with the paintings and everything at the start.
Yeah, I suppose it is very similar. I hadn't thought of that one. Okay, so anyway, because I kind of searched for art, I've kind of become a kind of artifact-seeking person anyway. I thought it'd be nice if I could find this Heart of the Rose. Again, it's not as famous as all these other relics, but it's worth, So that's kind of like got me investigating. But back in sort of the 40 years ago, when I first looked into Biddulph Grange, it was there was gardens around there. At the time in the 1850s, when me and I group had been there, were wonderful gardens. But the house had been virtually abandoned, and by the 1980 when I first went there, and the gardens were overgrown. The place was being used as a convalescent hospital, so that nobody had much use for the ground except very close to the mansion itself, and that's how it was. There's not a lot. Nobody done research back then. There wasn't, you couldn't do a lot of research online because there wasn't an online. I went to local libraries and stuff and tried to look through records, but could find very little to might help finding this relic or discovering more about the Order of Meonaya. I mean, why were they doing this stuff? Were they just out for thrills? Was there any, what? And over the years, researching Biddulph Grange and that Victorian Meonaya group became like a quest, because all sorts of strange synchronicities and weird happenings would take place accompanying the investigation, some of which I'll talk about in a minute. But eventually, relatively recently, things had changed, totally changed, and made it all the more possible now to investigate the place properly and discover more about it. The property was eventually sold by the hospital. It was taken over by the National Trust, which in England are the people who preserve ancient monuments, the government department. It was taken over by the National Trust. Is there a National Trust in Australia?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So they, that's what they did. Took this over, and then gradually they've been restoring the garden over the last 20 years. But a large part of the garden was only recently restored and opened to the public. So I thought, I hadn't investigated the Biddulph Grange case for some time, but I went there with my long-standing American friend, Jodie Russell, who's a paranormal investigator. And also, we've investigated many things in the past. The Ark of the Covenant story, for example, certainly did that with Jodie. And so I said, let's go to Biddulph Grange. They've just opened a whole new section of the garden that might be worth taking up the thing again. And we went back there, and just to explain what's weird about the ground is that in 1851, the two families that were associated with Biddulph Grange, the Batemans and Heath. The Batemans originally owned it. Heath were their best friends. Then it kind of switched when Batemans went broke. They were kind of like the group was founded, the Meonaya group, not because of some occultist Greek research or somebody sort of suddenly finding some kind of ancient instruction, but by a 7-year-old girl who started having visions. The 7-year-old girl was Mary Heath, the daughter of Robert Heath, the second owner of the Biddulph Grange mansion. Right on the edge of the property, there was this old stone circle. Next to it, a burial site. It's not as old as Stonehenge. It's about 1,500 years old, and so is this tomb, this stone tomb that's there. And it was the last of the Celtic tombs to be built in Britain before the Anglo-Saxons invaded. In legend, it's actually thought to have been associated with the burial place of Morgan le Fay. That's Morgana in the Arthurian story. Yep. And or at least an historical version of her. And while visiting there, James Bateman, who owned the property, his cousin Thomas was an archaeologist, one of the first archaeologists, and he was literally doing an archaeological dig on this tomb. While he was there, little Mary was playing around the area, and she crawled into the tomb and came out psychic. That's all I can say. According to the accounts that I've read in letters, by various members of the Meonite group, the Bateman and Heath families. Mary went in there running away from her mother, saying that she wasn't going to, she didn't need to go to the bathroom. You should be going to the bathroom. You should be going to the toilet. No. And came out saying, I have a message. Something along those lines. And you'd have thought at first, obviously, they all said, behave, little Mary, behave. And she just started saying to them things that they couldn't have known. Like, who was having an affair with whom, what somebody's dirty secrets were. And they're thinking, right, we better listen to this little girl. Seriously, I mean, that's the kind of thing that had happened. She suddenly, and then she'd sort of kind of like kick out of it and be like a little girl again. Then every so often she'd like go off. Not so much a trance, because she always remembered it. Even as a grown woman, she said she remembers what she was doing. She just felt like she needed to do it. She wasn't possessed by it. Anyway, she was the one who said, you've got to restart this, or start a group to do with psychic stuff and all that. They were interested in it anyway, but they hadn't got any official group. And of course, they weren't prepared to accept what little Mary said unless she could prove beyond doubt that she kind of had some sort of, that she could do this stuff. Well, I think she probably proved herself, but, why is supposed to start this group? So she led them to find on the grounds nearby an underground chamber, which was under an old ruined chapel that had been sealed up for centuries, which contained all these old documents and parchments and things that had been possessed by the original Order of Meonite and hidden there, because it turns out that the original leader of the Order of Meonite in Mary Queen of Scots' time, the Mary on the sword, isn't Mary Queen of Scots, but a woman called Mary Biddulph, who lived on a manor on the site of what's now Biddulph Grange.
Yeah.
And so, in other words, what I'd been thinking originally about, did they just learn of the original Meonite group and decide to call them that because it was cool, or was there some kind of continuation? Well, neither was true. They hadn't learned about the Meonite. They hadn't decided, let's just restart this. They'd been led to a depository of the early Order of Meonite's magical accoutrements, if you like, all their paraphernalia. And that in itself had been what led them to restart the Order of Meonite. And they wouldn't have done it, and they wouldn't have all these magical texts and stuff, if it wasn't for this little 7-year-old girl, Mary Ann Heath, dragging them there. And so consequently, the starting of this group is it's a movie in its own right. This little girl suddenly does this, fine, and it's this particular thing that they found. It wasn't just any old, but it's a crypt that many occultists and people interested in history of the mysticism had been looking for, something called the Tomb of Christian Rosencrantz. But that is a completely separate story. I won't go into that now because it'll be a bit complicated. So anybody that when this was found, these people not only knew that, our little Mary is something special, but we really have got to sort of start experimenting with all this occult paraphernalia and see what happens. So, okay, that is weird stuff. But what they did next was kind of like the really interesting part, because presumably either Mary told or they learned how to do this in these books, which still haven't been rediscovered. That's an ongoing. But for some reason, they decided to build all these shrines in the gardens of Biddulph Grange. There's an mock Egyptian tomb. This was built in the early 1850s. A mock Egyptian tomb. There's a Chinese pagoda and temple building. There's a Celtic water shrine, which is basically a bunch of standing stones, some of the Stonehenge stones, and a sacred spring. And there are underground Roman catacombs, like a Roman temple. They recreated different things, different forms of shrines from different cultures from all over the world. Now, while this was going on, the owner of the property, James Bateman, he was traveling the world collecting plants, trees, shrubs, flowers, you name it, to be planted in his garden because he was fascinated by horticulture.
Yeah.
So he basically created these amazing gardens, spent a fortune traveling the world, finding the seeds, cuttings or whatnot, having them shipped back to England, and spent the next 20 years traveling the world. He wasn't there, leaving his wife, Maria, to start this Order of Meoniah and do what she wanted. As long as he planted as long as she planted or had his plants planted for him, he was happy. He wasn't there to know what was going on anyway. I don't know to what extent he knew what was going on. At the time, Maria was the first, if you like, leader of this group. Obviously, little Mary of 7 was probably given the orders, but technically anyway, the person in charge of it was Maria Bateman. And she was the one who oversaw all these buildings. Now, if you go online now, you will sort of look about Biddulph Grange for the National Trust, and it'll tell you that, these shrines, these garden ornamental buildings were put there as a kind of backdrop to display these wonderful flowers and things that have been collected from around the world. They were built by James Bateman. They were not built by James Bateman. They were built by Maria Bateman, who couldn't give a fig about plants. In fact, she left all the gardening to everybody else. She just said, yeah, get on with it. She built these, he's basically, people say Bateman built these shrines because in the Victorian times, the only people who ever got a mention were the men. So if it was something happened during a period of time of a particular owner, and that owner being a man, whatever was happening there was down to James Bateman, except if it was something bad. Somebody shot somebody's dog, that wouldn't be down to him. But that's just the way it is. So don't expect to go online and see a whole outline of all what I'm talking about now written down on the website for Biddulph Grange. They won't mention anything about all this stuff. Well, A, because they're not interested. B, because they basically get a lot of people coming through and paying to go around the gardens. And they are beautiful gardens, and they are an amazing historical legacy. They're incredible. But that's not the original purpose of these shrines. So over the period of going there, myself and Jodie went to these shrines to see what happened. In one of them, the mock Egyptian tomb, there's a great big long dark corridor, and it's painted, can you say blood pink? That colour that's above your head looks like blood pink to me. The swirling galaxy thing.
Oh, yes.
That's the colour of the walls and things.
Wow.
There's no hieroglyphics. It's pretty spooky, right? And this corridor must be about 50 feet long. Narrow corridor. It goes down, and there's these sphinxes outside, and there's these symbols outside the doorway, like the Egyptian sun symbol. You go down this corridor, and it smells musty with age and dank, and you can hear dripping water. You get to the center, the little chamber there, and right in front of you is this life-size statue, or bigger than an actual, a statue of a baboon god from ancient Egypt called the Ape of Thoth. I say it's life-size. This is probably about 4 times larger than an actual baboon. But the Ape of Thoth, as it's known, represents it's a demigod. He's not an actual god. He's a kind of trickster of the gods, like Loki in the Norse tradition, or the Fool, the Joker in Western tradition. He's not good, he's not bad. He lives outside fate and fortune, and he has control over the wheels of fate. And the ancient Egyptians would invoke him and try and channel him in order to change bad destiny. They might end up with worse. They never knew what they were going to get. But he seemed to be able to sit between the worlds. He sat between life and death. That's your general idea of what he represents. But you look in the guidebook, and what do they tell you? They say, the ape of Thoth was put here by James Bateman, when he was actually in China, was put here by James Bateman to represent his love of botany. And the actual Egyptian god of botany is called Geb. It looks something like this thing. Secondly, there is a nature aspect to this ape of Thoth, or Arni, to give it its real name. But it's the nature of chaos and the absurd, not the grand order of horticulture that James Bateman says. And then so you've got the ape of Thoth, something representing a character that sits between multi-worlds and the multiverse in this Egyptian temple. And you're thinking, this is weird.
Yeah.
Right under one side of him, there's an alcove in the side of the chamber. And that's it, basically. That's what's in there. There's some steps with another entrance out the one side, so steps going up to the entrance out the back. Now, I'll just explain some things that happened here. We went there on one occasion. We began to wonder whether there might be a bricked-up chamber there. The central chamber is a bit small to do any kind of rituals or anything for more than just a couple of people. And could there have been another part of the room behind what's now this bench alcove? Anyway, when we were there one time filming, and this guy who's a local buildings expert, he's banging on the wall. He said, there's no doubt there's hollow. There's something behind here. When we went up out the back later on, we were able to find that we could find under the, undergrowth that now is over the back of the top. But I can't properly explain this. We found there was definitely the outline of walls that seemed to be the top of the walls of something that lay further back.
Yeah.
And we even found a small gap in some stone steps. Then you can drop a coin through and it waits, and ching, you can tell there is
something in there.
There was something there, and it's definitely been maybe half filled in.
Yeah.
But what happened when we were doing this is this guy's knocking on the wall, and he just jokingly at one point said, "Hello." He's knocking on the wall. There are other people going through, other visitors at the time, but we don't know if there's anything weird. When we're actually looking at the video that's taken later on, when he knocks on the wall, he goes doop 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 3 times. Just immediately afterwards, doop doop doop, 3 other knocks come back, like echoing his own. Then he knocks twice, and they come back, echoing his own. And then, weirdly enough, if that's not weird enough, when he says hello, a woman's voice goes, "Hello." And we're thinking, what? Now,
So it's definitely
we went
not an
back
echo
there,
then.
we thought, maybe someone's messing around. Maybe they can hear us out the back and there's kids messing around out there or something. Maybe the voice, maybe acoustics are weird and somebody's standing outside the other end of the corridor. And but nothing we did could actually reproduce what went on there. I couldn't figure it out anyway. I'm not saying it's paranormal, but I can't explain it.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened is that Jodie started getting these visions. They were dreams. While she was meditating, rather than being asleep. Not like Alan Beard halfway up a telegraph pole. She's actually sitting there cross-legged doing something intentionally when she has her vision. And she had a vision of this place, this tomb, Egyptian tomb, and said she saw a woman there in late Victorian clothes who was standing right beside, in her vision, there wasn't another room there. There was a gap through into another area.
Yep.
There were statues in there. This woman in Victorian clothes is standing there. Then in her vision, she sees me in modern clothes walking down the corridor past this Victorian lady. I don't see the Victorian lady. She sees me.
Yep.
She then, as I walk past her, she turns, her head follows me. She looks at me so she can see me, Jodie says. Then she turns, goes into the other room that Jodie could see in the vision. That was it. So she said, I had this dream. It's really weird. I thought, that's odd. When we went back one occasion to Biddulph Grange, Jodie's filming me because I said, oh, can I just do a bit of commentary on it? I want to put some on YouTube. So I'm just talking. She's filming me. And she said, oh, my God, you're now wearing exactly what you did in my vision. I said, yeah, but I always wear black stuff. I said, no, but I just happened to have bought a coat a couple of days before, a new one. And that's what she said. I said, that's what you were wearing. But she didn't just make this up afterwards or kind of get influenced to think about this afterwards, because she had described that I had a coat with like a fur collar thing. And I said, there is no way I'd ever buy a coat with a fur collar. But I did, and this was it. Anyway, so we talk about this. That's really odd. Maybe something like that. Maybe we'll see something. Films are going down from behind, going down this corridor. It's all dark. I get in there. Nothing happens that I know of. But when we look at the film later, you can see, just about make out like a grey figure of a woman. You can tell like she's got like a high collar dress on or something and a bun in her hair. Turns around and looks at me as I go past. And Jodie says, that is what I saw in my vision. But I'm thinking, this isn't your typical ghost. Jodie has a vision of me in the future with a coat on I haven't even bought yet, a woman in the past, a place in the past where there is an actual way through to this other room, which isn't there now, over sort of, as well as having a vision of what it's like now. But not only that, this woman from the past is no ghost. She can see me. Well, maybe ghosts can see you. But I mean, the fact is, it seems more likely to me that Jodie had somehow seen past, present, and future, and that this woman in the past could see the future and could see me. So what are we dealing with? Now, each of these shrines at Biddulph Grange and the whole mystery of the place is equally as bizarre. This whole Mia mystery is really, really odd, in as much as it's not your typical ghost, it's not your typical phenomena, it's not your typical anything. It's all like to do with different times, different universes, and strange fate. And that was what Jodie and I decided to call the book.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And what you were describing there is something that I've actually experienced myself. There's a place down in the south of Western Australia, which is it's an old quarantine station, and we did an investigation down there about 12 years ago, and we had a very similar thing where we were getting contact through a board, but she could see us on the other side, and she saw us as the ghost, and she was scared, and it took a while to create this thing, and it's almost like very similar to what you're saying, where it's a crossing of, or you know how they say the veil gets very close in parts. Yeah. It's very much like that. You're getting a glimpse of another world almost, and be it the multiverse where it's the same people, but I think she said it was 1918 or 1912, 1930. It was somewhere in that vicinity, and it was very weird. But I think that's a good place to actually end the show and keep people wanting more. They'll have to go out and get your book now to find out more, because we've gone over. And like I said, I could listen to you for another 3-4 hours talking about things, but we're both busy and you have to get back to it. But what I would like to do is invite you back so we can talk about some of your other books, because we sort of touched on them, and things like King Arthur, the story there, and then that leads into the Holy Grail, and and then you're talking about the Ark of the Covenant. I think we could probably do a show on each of them because they're just so interesting. And if you're keen, I'd love to arrange that for some time down the track.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
Oh,
I mean, it's good doing interviews with you because you're not some crazy time in the middle of the night for me, like America is.
No, I'm just a few hours ahead.
In the middle of the night for you.
No. It's only early here, so you don't have to stress about that. Oh. But I would like to thank you very much for your time. You've been an absolute pleasure to have on the show, and I look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you very much indeed.
Take it easy, guys.